Hi, it's Drake Griggs, founder of Obsidian Wisdom. Welcome to another Retirement Readiness Thursday. Today, I have for you a case study with Patricia. She is flying solo and she's a 60, wants to know if she can retire at 65. We'll go through a handful of things that you would normally want to look at. When you're talking about retirement and we're single, we are normally going to be looking at a handful of different types of risk. Everything has risk, but we would normally be making sure we have things like our healthcare taken care of because it's going to be just us. Make sure the income's obviously taken care of. How do we maximize that? And then when we're trying to keep our expenses normally as low as possible, that normally comes up with a way that helps us to not have to worry about whether we'll run out of money or not in retirement. I will share this case study with you. Okay, so when you're planning on retiring, whether you're single or not single, there's a handful of things that all of us normally want to be thinking about. And normally it's going to be our income. What sources do we have? Where is that going to come from? Normally that's going to be our expenses. Just how much do we plan on spending in retirement to maintain our lifestyle? That normally leads into risk protection. So in terms of risk protection, that's normally going to be things like investment risk, like how much money can I lose as I'm getting ready for retirement? It also is going to be looking at healthcare risk because that is one of those expenses that a lot of people worry about. In fact, I think the numbers say it's probably like the number two risk that people have. Number one is running out of money. And then number two is healthcare. And so it really goes a lot with number one when you really think about it. And then that normally lends us to look at taxes. Are we optimizing ourselves from a tax perspective to make sure that we're able to take care of everything? And so I'll go through a handful of things that you would look at, that I would look at when you're deciding whether or not we're ready to retire and whether we're on pace to retire. And so let's start with the profile. So you can see we have a net worth of about 1.4 million. You can see that a decent amount of that is inside of the home. We do have close to $1 million in investments. So we have 85,000 in a Roth, we have 600,000 in the 401k, and then she has taxable account. That's just your brokerage account. It's a very fancy way to just say money that went into your bank account and then you invested it in something. It's just money that's been taxed once already. And then we have a HSA account. And for those that don't know, you have to have a high deductible plan with your employer. And if you do, you have access to a health savings account. And the reason that we normally like them is because they have the triple tax benefit. And one of those is, well, the money goes in tax deductible. It doesn't count as income today when I put it in my health savings account. Number two is the money grows tax deferred. So I don't actually pay taxes on the income growth in my health savings account each year. And then as long as we spend it on healthcare expenses, it comes out tax-free. That is the triple tax benefit. So it's always nice to have a decent amount of money that we're putting away for our healthcare expenses, because that is, as we mentioned, it's one of the risks to a successful retirement. And we'll go through a handful of that. And so she was able to save a decent amount of money over the time leading into retirement. It's normally probably worth mentioning, and I will share with you all, your HSA and your Medicare, they don't talk to each other. They are not friends. So when you activate Medicare, you cannot contribute any more into your HSA account, just as a regular public service announcement. And so those are going to be the investments that we have. Our goals in retirement is to be able to retire at 65. So that's in 5 years. We want to have our retirement expenses down to about $4,000. Now that doesn't count things like the mortgage. This is just your normal expenses. And it's a very fancy way of saying the expenses listed over here, like our credit card expenses and our mortgage and our car payments, they're counted on this column. So when we're talking about things over here, it's basically in addition to that. So she would love to have her retirement expenses about $4,000 a month. And I believe it's currently at about $5,000. So she'd want to be able to knock off about $1,000 in retirement, which is generally very doable for most people. If you're not sure where to start, most people, we start with the idea of, well, if I live off of this certain amount and I'm contributing to my retirement, when I retire, I won't contribute anymore. So whatever that percentage is, just take that off of whatever income needs are. So if you make it easy for me. So let's say you make $100,000 every single year, and then you contribute 15%. So you contributed $15,000 into your retirement accounts. Well, that means that you technically are living off of $85,000. And so that would be a decent starting place for most people in retirement, as long as you're maintaining the lifestyle. Now, if you're moving and you're going to move to a higher or lower cost of living place, or if you're significantly ramping up your lifestyle where you're doing a lot of traveling and cool stuff like that, then we would obviously add to it. It's very possible that you actually have a more expensive lifestyle in retirement, at least in the beginning times. But if you're someone that's on the opposite end, we're like, man, Dre, I am so worn out. I just want to chill on the back porch and read a good book. I just want to relax and take little walks with my puppy. I'm not going to be doing a whole lot of the extra stuff. I'm going to be local, right? I'm going to be hanging out locally. Well, then normally we can lower it even more. We're like, hey, we can significantly reduce your retirement lifestyle. Then normally the reason we talk about that is there's really three levers. And so when I have a good idea what is most important to you, that's normally the lever I scratch off. What's the point of right? The way the Bible talks about is like the idea of sacrificing your soul to gain the world, because there's some things that if you sacrifice it to gain everything else, it's the first thing you buy. So it's kind of weird. And I find that health is like that, where you're like, yeah, I'm gonna sacrifice my health to make this happen. And then the first thing you'll want to do is buy like a trainer and a chef and all this other stuff. Well, you sacrifice something to buy that thing. So you shouldn't have sacrificed it. Or you sacrifice your family and like, oh, as soon as I get it right, I'm gonna be trying to buy back these relationships. I'm gonna take my children places. I'm gonna try to do all this stuff. Well, then we probably shouldn't sacrifice the things that is the first thing we would buy. And so that's just me, right? That's kind of how I feel about it. You may feel a little bit differently. But for our plan, we said, all right, well, if we have the three levers, which is spend less in retirement, make more, so I contribute more, or I retire later. Those are normally the three levers. And the reason sometimes retiring later works for people is because a handful of benefits are stacking on top of each other. Number one is you're not taking money out of your retirement account, which means you're allowing your money to grow an additional year, and you're still contributing to that retirement account. So you're putting in more money, the money is growing, and you're not taking the money out. And then naturally, that also means you're retired one less year. So your money needs to last a little bit less than it did if you retired earlier. When you stack those up, and then even if you talk about, well, now I can keep my benefits and my employer, my benefits are a little bit better. I don't have to take out Social Security because I'm still working. So that has one more year of growth, where you can see that it does stack up. It just depends on which lever that is not the most important to you. And then we look at the other two. Healthcare expenses are pretty much one of the big ones when you're single, because you have to make sure that you're taking care of yourself, right? If you don't have the health stuff covered, it's going to impact your retirement. I can't really stress it enough. And so normally if you're single, I will leave in the long-term care. And now I'll take it out if you tell me to, right? It's your plan. I'm just helping you guide it. But I'm definitely like, well, look, I mean, if we're single, we have no kids, like who would take care of us? You're like, well, I don't plan on getting sick, Dre. Okay, I don't plan on getting sick either, right? You can ask my family. I don't ever plan on getting sick, but it happens every so often. Not very much, but every so often it happens. So I'm like, look, can we just put it in the plan? Can we just see what it will look like? And so we'll talk about a little bit of that. We talked about traveling a little bit, said about 6,000 a year. We do keep up with inflation. And so the general inflation is 3%. And so every single year we expect that to be a small increase. So we do account for that. And then we said there's like a handful of hobbies, Dre. I'm not 100% sure which one I'll do at any given time. And so she was like gardening and yoga and just different classes at the community. She said, that's about 2,000 a year. I was like, all right, cool, no problem. And then we're going to fix up the home. And then we said, well, let's wait until 66 after we start Medicare, because we don't want to increase our income where it changes the brackets that we'd be taxed in Medicare. So that's called IRMA. And so we said, look, I don't want to mess up my IRMA, where if you look at it, it'll say, well, if you make more than, I think it's like around 108,000 a year, and they have like a 2-year look back, they will move you to a new bracket where you'll pay an extra amount every single month the rest of your life. And so for most people, if you tell me, well, Dre, I'm going to make these adjustments, I'm like, well, let's wait until after you start Medicare so you can lock in these amounts. And so that's why that one is set at 66, and why you should do the exact same thing. But I know we want to update our appliances thing. And then she said she wanted to do charitable giving, and that would be about $1,500 a year, but we did not increase that with inflation. She was like, yeah, I feel like that'll be around the set number. Whenever you're talking about in your retirement, we'll get started, we'll add some things, And I'm big on, if we check things off, we should add something else. Or if I check off one thing, I should add one more new thing. If I go places and meet people and go to concerts and go to the Super Bowl and all these other things, at some point I'm going to be experiencing new things, and those new things will give me new ideas. And so your plan should adjust with you. These are the most important goals at 60. You may have new goals at 70. And so it's good to always write them down, check them off, be excited about that. And then we kind of can keep going from, from there. As far as the saving, I believe this ends up being around 13, maybe 14% of her salary. So she puts 4% of her 401k, and that's with the 4% match, which is normally going to be generally a great place to start. The reason we normally will tamper that down a little bit as we get closer to retirement, but never below the match. I mean, it's free money, right? Like, you put in $100 and you made $100 with the 100% match, or 100% match on the first 4%. I say, look, take the 100% return, like, go for that. But the reason we tamper it down is because the closer we get to 73, the closer we get to required minimum distributions, which is a fancy way of saying Uncle Sam wants to tax us. And if Uncle Sam is going to mess with us and make us pay more in taxes, we want to strategize in a way that gives him the least amount of money possible. Now, I know some people will say, Dre, I think it is my duty to pay taxes. And I'm totally cool with that. I like having schools and roads too. But I think it's fair to say that maybe we have a slight spending problem, right? Where I think I saw that the big beautiful bill is going to add maybe $3 trillion to the deficit. So I don't think we have a money problem. I think we have a spending problem. And so with that being said, I am someone who believes the tax code is designed to incentivize you to do certain things. That's a fair statement. So if you go through the bills, and I tried to download it, it crashed my computer a couple times. So that's just kind of how our taxes are passed. And you go through the thousands of pages, you can see that there are certain things that they want us to do. And they incentivize us to do it by giving us tax breaks. So in my opinion, that means I am 100% doing what Uncle Sam is hoping I do. If he says, Dre, I'm going to give you super duper amazing tax breaks if you open a rental complex, and then I start renting out houses, Uncle Sam's excited because people are not living in the streets. And he's like, thank you, Dre, I appreciate that. Here's a tax break. If Uncle Sam is like, I want people to have jobs, and you have a business and you hire people, and Uncle Sam is like, thank you so much, here's a big tax break. Well, I think giving people jobs is what Uncle Sam loves. Those are his number one and number two goals. Put people in houses and give people jobs. So those end up being very incentivized in our tax code. And if you look at, I think we're at literally historic lows of birth rates. So you see a lot of things in there as far as incentivizing people to have children. And so if you look at industrialized countries, and I won't go too long on the economics of it, but I'm going to put my economic hat on for like a minute. But if you look at industrialized countries, people aren't having children, right? They're trying to incentivize people to have children. You look at Sweden and Denmark, you look at China, you look at Italy, you look at Russia, you look at Israel, you look at the United States, you look at Germany, you look at Europe. If you look at an industrialized Western country, people are having 1 to less than 2 children on average. And that does not work from a tax basis. And you see that with our Social Security, where in the early going, Social Security used to be like 18 people working for every one person that was retired. And now it's like 2 people working for every one person that's retired. That math isn't mathing. And so that's me. I'll get off the soapbox, I'll get off the economics. I think paying the least amount of taxes is a part of the system as far as incentivizing things. And so I like to kind of do that. I'm not saying just open up a random account in the Caymans and hide your money. I'm saying investing it in the economy in a way that makes the economy work better is a part of the American job, all right, as a citizen. So we'll move on, and I'll go into why that we ended up with 88% probability. So our investments, normally if you're single, you want to be a little bit more on the conservative end of your investments, but not too conservative that you're at least not keeping up with inflation. And the reason is because the idea is, well, if I lose my money, I'm in trouble, right? Like, I mean, that's really the idea. And because we're solo, we ideally want to focus a lot on risk protection, because we don't have where someone can work a little bit longer, or we have someone that can help us, or even like a life insurance policy on a spouse. There is a lot that is like, we got to get this right the very first time. And so that ends up being a little bit something that we think about a lot. As far as the investments, you can see that a lot of that is in the tax deferred accounts, which normally, if you're like 75% of my money is in my 401k, normally that means we have an opportunity to do Roth conversions. And all the Roth conversion is if I have $600,000, well, we'll say 500,000 to make the math easy for me. If you have $500,000 inside of your 401k, and then if you go into one of those RMD calculations when you turn 73, basically the way you would do that is you say, I got 500,000 now. Let's assume I get a 4% return every single year. How much would be in that account when I am 73? And for most of you, that means you're going to be really close to probably like $1 million by then. And if that is the case, then you now would do the calculation of what is the required minimum distribution on $1 million. And you're going to see that that's somewhere around like $50,000 to $60,000 that you have to take out. So for most people, we will then say, all right, well, how about we start moving some of this money out instead of paying the taxes at 73 on a larger amount? What if we're able to spread it out between now and then? So we got 13 years. If there's any year that we have taxes lower than our normal tax rate, we'll take some out. Or when we first retire, we use our tax deferred accounts to be able to take that money out during those 0 years, but I can take out a larger amount to maintain my lifestyle. And I'll show you kind of what that looks like. And then the idea is if I increase what's tax-free, well, it's tax-free, right? So I mean, you can't go wrong. It just sounds good, tax-free. And so we would end up looking at that. So you can see we did put the health savings, not health savings, but the long-term care at the last 2 years. So that's where the drop is. And then the probability of success is how we get the medium number. All right. So when it comes to the actual retirement plan, the one that we were able to put together, we were able to 100% be like, yes, you're going to retire at 65. Retiring at 65 is definitely doable. Your monthly expenses dropping to 4,000, definitely doable. We would maintain for the next 5 years the contributions that we've already set, and then we're maintaining the expenses, but we're just going to pay off the debt, pay off the house, pay off the cars, and things like that. As far as the allocation of the investments, we did keep them, as we mentioned, conservative. And then the main thing is that we did the Roth conversions, and then we kept it the most conservative spending, which is inflation adjusted, which just means I spend the same amount plus inflation, and that's very unlikely. Most of you will be like, all right, I'm done. I've traveled the world. Like I'm gonna hang out and volunteer within my local community, things like that. We just change our lifestyle as we move on through retirement. So let me show you what we ended up doing. All right. So let me first show you how the Roth conversions were done. So what we did is we said the allocation is going to be put the money in your taxable, tax-free, and then your tax deferred, right? So we already said, hey, we got a lot of money that's sitting inside of our tax deferred account. So let's go ahead and just focus on matching the match, but not putting the extra. So if you're putting in 10%, we would drop it to just the match of the 4%. And then we would put the money in taxable, because if you leave that for a year and a day, it is a much more favorable tax rate as a capital gain. It's like normally half of the normal tax rate. And then the tax-free account, so there's just limits. So we just can't put as much inside of that. So that's why that was the second allocation. And then the withdrawal strategy that worked for her based on where the money was at, because it does change for each of us, is she would take the money out of the taxable account first, and then she'll take the money pro rata, which just means an equal amount out of her tax-free and her tax-deferred account. And so we would do that. As far as her Roth conversions, and I'll show you the graph where it makes it clean and simple. Anytime her ordinary income was below 10%, right? We could have done more or larger amounts, but if you just around there, that gives her the savings now and the savings later. And so what that ends up doing as far as a plan, you can see, it gives her about close to $500,000, close to $500,000 more in tax-adjusted ending assets, where she just didn't have to take out as much money as she would have. Because if you think about it, two things will happen. One is you have the RMDs. Yeah, 73 all the same, making you take out a certain amount. But then two, you have to consider the taxes. So if you lived off $100,000 a year, but then your taxes were 20%, well, you have to take out $120,000 each year to cover the taxes. So if you're able to lower your taxes and you're able to lower what Uncle Sam requires you to take out, that's how you end up with more money there. And then you have $150,000 less in taxes, and then that, as we mentioned, gives you $600,000 less in withdrawal from your tax deferred accounts because you don't have those RMDs. Now, the way it looks, and you can sort of see, I'm zooming in so you can see it all the way. what happens with most of you is you're working, you're making your normal money, you're paying your normal taxes around like that 22%, and then you retire, right? And so when you retire, you have the decision of where do you want to take the income from, because it's not earned income anymore. And that was when we said, let's take it out of the 401k. Let's fund those years in the 401k and do the Roth conversions for you. And so that's what we're able to do for her after 65. And you'll notice that that ends up only being at the 10% tax rate. That's what that blue is. And then that was it. Her income after that was above the 10%. Now, you could easily have said, I want to maintain my normal 22% tax, and we could fill up the gap all the way, and you'd probably take out almost all of it. You could have chosen in the middle and did 12% and filled the bucket up. But the idea is on the years when I retire and I get to choose what accounts I take the money out of, it's not a bad idea to say, if my plan is to extend how long before I take Social Security, and I need to bridge those years, how do I pay for my lifestyle while I wait for 70 or while I wait for 67 if you do your full Social Security? And I am saying that in this particular situation, we let the decision be made by what gives her the most flexibility in retirement. And so then that's how you end up making that decision. All of us get to decide when we retire, where does the money come out from? And then you decide, generally speaking, what makes the most sense. And so then that ends up being where she has the tax savings, move some of the money over, and then it lowers the RMDs that she has to take. And then you can see the health expenses, as we mentioned, as they bump up a little bit higher. And then we, rainbows and skittles, right? So that was how we did that. So that ends up giving her, as we mentioned, about $500,000 more in tax adjusted ending assets. So that was the main adjustment that we had made for her. And then that gave her an 88% probability of success. And the goal is generally to be above 70. And the reason we normally say above 70 is because there's some crazy stuff that we stress test for, and I'll show it to you real quick. And so normally when you're stress testing, right, we're saying, and you can see them down here, we're saying, what happens if the market drops 20%? What happens if taxes are 20% higher? What happens if Social Security is reduced by 30%, or we live 5 years longer and we're already planning to live to 90? So what happens if we live to 95? What happens if my healthcare expenses are 20% higher, or inflation, or my asset return is off by 1%, right? So we're looking at these. That's called a Monte Carlo simulation. Just means we run 1,000 different scenarios, and then we see how successful our retirement plan is. And then normally, if we're too dependent on any one thing, we normally will make the adjustments to help our plan. And so you can see in this particular one, the Social Security ended up giving us one of the lower amounts. And so we said, okay, what do we do to mitigate, to manage the risk of Social Security? And generally speaking, if we're talking about it being 20% lower hurting us, then we would normally say, well, what if we're able to wait so that we increase what Social Security is, so that at least if it's 20% lower, it's 20% lower off the larger number, right? So that was the idea of being able to handle that. You can see that as far as the taxes and everything, we were fine on that. So that's why we didn't have to do as many Roth conversions. We already were pretty well from that perspective. Inflation, we knew inflation would be a little bit of one because we have a relatively conservative investment allocation that is basically matching traditional inflation of around that 2 to 4%, around that 3%. And the return on the portfolio when it's conservative, you're probably looking at being around 4 or 5%. So we already know that that's basically baked into that cake, that if inflation ends up being higher and you have a conservative allocation, then inflation's gonna kick your butt, right? And so we already know about that. The healthcare, we already managed that. We placed so much of that in there. We had the national average for the health expenses. We had the long-term care, and then we had the Medicare Part A and B, and we did the where we adjusted how we took the money out. Right. So if you're someone that's like, Dre, what do I do? I have to spend some money, but I don't want my IRMA to be too high where my Medicare premiums are higher for B and D. And then they don't count things like your HSA account. So if you have money in your HSA, then that won't count against you. They don't count if you spend it out of your Roth account. That doesn't count in the traditional income calculation as well. So there are types of income that you can use where it doesn't count against you in the IRMA. And so we were able to already kind of take care of that. And then the asset return, again, because you're already relatively conservative in this allocation, if you have a conservative allocation, then you're definitely at basically your biggest risk are those, because my conservative allocation has me leaning on Social Security a little bit more. It has me hoping against inflation because I need inflation to be relatively consistent and low. And then if my allocation is even 1% lower and I'm already on the low end of the expected returns, that ends up being a larger risk, right? So that's all that's saying. And that's what I would expect from that design of a plan. But you can see why they end up the idea of stress testing, seeing where my weak spots are in my plan, end up being a good way to just kind of look at your plan, just be like, yeah, like how am I doing on this? Let me see if we have any questions because we are done. All right. See, Ronald said, I may have missed it, but are contributions to a Roth account allowed to continue after retirement? If so, would it continuing to say, well, be an all encompassing solution to Patricia's concerns? You can do Roth conversions and contribute to the Roth into retirement, right? And that's what Patricia is doing. And many of her Roth conversions are starting after she's already retired. And so you could keep doing that if you want to. And for most people, it depends on if you need the money. And so if it's something where you're saying, well, Dre, I have, a pension and it pays me $5,000 a month, and I'm only out here spending three. Well, then, we should be investing and putting the other 2,000 somewhere, because you and I know if you just put in your savings account, they're going to pay you like 0.01% or something like that, right? Obviously, it's a little bit higher now because interest rates are a little bit higher, but you get what I'm saying, that you're going to just have a very small return on your money. And I'm someone who doesn't like that, because we know that the bank is taking your money and it is charging people 10% for a car, it's charging people 5% for a house, and then it's paying you 1%, right? Like, to me, that just doesn't feel right. Like, I like to get a return that matches the return that they're getting, within reason. Obviously, with everything is within reason, but I don't like the idea of knowing a bank is taking my money and they're giving out business loans and car loans and mortgages, and they're making a ton of money from my money, and they're only giving me 1%. And so for me, I 100% agree with you that if you find yourself with extra money, why not keep investing it? Right? I mean, why not? Because the bank is investing your money. So why not do yourself a favor and be the most advantageous that you can? And it's definitely a possibility that you could say, I'm going to just continue moving all of it, right? You could say, I'm going to move all of it from a 401k into my Roth. Generally, no, you don't really need to. The idea is just to have it to be a manageable required minimum distribution that matches what your actual lifestyle would be. And then you could just spread those taxes out over the life of your retirement. But it's kind of those 10 years, whatever makes the most sense, is kind of how we start wanting to move it a little bit. Right. So I appreciate that, Roman. And I agree with you for sure. Investing is a great solution because it ends up increasing how much money I have in my account, which increases how much I could spend later if you need it. But generally, you don't. If you're able to invest it, you don't need it. But at least you gave yourself that option. I'm big on flexibility. You guys know I talk about flexibility all the time, because I do think you don't want to be stuck like Chuck in a pickup truck. All right. As always, and that'll do it for us. As always, you guys know that I absolutely love the time that we spend together. I think we only have one more specific case study is left in this series, and I have a cool new thing that I'll do for you guys, and stay posted on that. And until next time, I'm Dre Griggs, founder of Obsidian Wisdom, certified financial planner who would love to put a plan together for you. Until next time, stay safe and enjoy.